the DIMES project is European Commission funded, and we have got our final event in Pretoria next year. But we're very excited to be having the special issue coming out after our very first meeting was at Lille in 2020, just when we were starting to bump elbows, but not wise enough not to meet in person. Luckily, we were all okay. This panel is the first of three, the second of three. I missed the first one today, but Tony Hastrup funded that. And it's decolonial, post-colonial, or decentering. And what I've asked the speakers to do is, yes, to talk about their work as regards this, but also somebody's getting a better reception than you gave me. Yes. I'm now feeling a bit disappointed.
Okay.
Thank you, that's much better. But I have also asked them to talk about the differences, if any, between these concepts. And just as I said to them, I'd like to say to you too, because I like to be a little bit provocative, for those of you who don't know me, that we had a conversation at Leiden University, so I'm in the Netherlands, I'm at a Dutch university that is very white in attitudes, despite the fact that I'm in an international relations department where we have a lot of people of colour, but nevertheless, for most of us, our overwhelming impression is that this is a very white university. And at one of our staff meetings, I'm in the I teach on the MA International Relations, and so all of the staff there are either historians, scholars of international relations, or area studies, and some of them, like me, kind of trust that Socrates thinks over two boundaries. But we were having a conversation about decolonising the curriculum, and then a couple of colleagues were talking about how they didn't like to use the word decolonising because it was very antagonistic. It was met with a lot of resistance, and so they used decentering as a less combative, more inclusive term. Now, while I have some sympathy with this, I think I'm also old enough and far enough along in my career to ask whether, given some of the problems, the challenges that we face, we should be worried about whether or not we antagonise people, right? If we look at the literature on knowledge production and especially co-production, this is about tensions, it's about differences, and about how these conversations that we have when we disagree about things can actually move us along, not only in terms of scholarship, but also in terms of our citizenship. Right, so I have also asked the speakers where they feel confident about doing this to talk to these issues, and I hope you're now not going to feel bad about defending decentering. All right, lovely. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves because I hate it when other people introduce me, mostly because my bio is always out of date, and so they always say wrong things about me. So, did you decide which of you two wanted to go first?
No, we didn't. We were going to let the...
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, catch the white person by the toe. If they squeal, let it go. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe. You're going first.
Okay.
Right. There was a bad word that I changed for white person. Is that okay?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Introduce yourself a little bit and then your opening comments as we agreed.
So we don't do all introductions first? Or?
No, let's do you individually, please.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Hi everybody. My name is Inka Mamekoswa Evans. I am currently, which is nice because, like you said, it's a bit of an update. I'm currently studying, working at the University of Oxford, but I was previously in the University of Ghana. My work looks actually at women's and gendered history on the continent, and also what I term as other others, which is a concept borrowed by Gaurav Desai in his book, Subject to Colonialism, that looks at the colonial encounter in a messy and complex way, and recognizes that whilst in, I guess, the colonial archives and the colonial library, there are others, there are also other others. So people who fall not so neatly, I guess, in between those cracks. And I think my actually quite interestingly, my employment in the past, should I say, 4 or 5 years has given me very different vantage points on this issue, which is quite interesting. I was a student both in Leiden, actually, in Maastricht, in the Netherlands, where I very much was a big part of the decolonial movements there as a student. Then I had the opportunity to work as faculty and designed a decolonial course for Maastricht University, and also worked around policy in there. And now, even though I still do that, I'm much more focused on research, not around those issues. But I think I mentioned this because my opinions on the decolonization topic have really transformed over these past few years. I think that there's definitely a nuance and complexity that has to be central when we talk about these issues. Of course, terminology is a key part of that. Absolutely methodology, how we practically implement that and teach that in our classrooms. And then also lip service, which I feel, having been in these positions, is quite a big issue as well. In the paper that I wrote alongside Denai for the special issue, we really talked about how the approaches to the decolonial movement have kind of gotten away from us in different contexts. We talk about what actually is subversive within the academy, and in order to do that, I actually have been very influenced by a woman called Dominga Bamber and her work around connected sociologies and decolonization specifically. And I guess my feelings really align with her in saying that in order to decolonize, it's not so much this idea that we have to reform, but actually rethink key fields on the premise of those fields not having effectively grappled with colonialism and empire in the first place, and what that reintroduction of these concepts to those fields then does. We have decolonial efforts that a lot of students pick up on and use. For example, the reintroduction of literature, key theorists that have been excluded, people of color, minority voices. But how actually effective is this to the decolonial movement? It's part and parcel of it, but it cannot and should not end there, right? I don't think that just reintroducing literature without also kind of giving students and faculty the proper tools to be able to teach about that literature and relate to it is really going to change much. And alongside that comes the introduction of the problem of tokenistic representation that you actually find a lot of in the current contemporary decolonial movements. Who is it that embodies basically, Black voices, gendered voices, and what are the problems with reintroducing or introducing texts into the canon and curriculum that are supposed to represent these views? The paper that, again, I submitted to the DIMES special issue, it really grapples with this idea of how do you allow for your classroom to interact with that literature, and how do you select literature that can effectively interact with both your classroom and your curriculum. And I think it's the combination of that for me, introduces decolonization, I guess, more prominently. There is also this tendency within post-colonial literature, and this is much more my work currently, I think, to create a self-serving narrative, to pick and choose the specific individuals out of history or voices out of history that represent triumphalist narratives, but that don't add a complexity or disturb those narratives enough. We tend to leave those alone, and I think that's also deeply problematic. I understand that in order to give voice and also respond to a Western canon that has, absolutely painted specific peoples and whole regions of the world as lacking of agency and voice, you pick and choose those narratives that combat that, but in doing so, you also remove the narratives that don't necessarily paint this broader picture but are equally as important to study. And I think that's a current debate that we need to talk about within decolonization studies.
Thank you very much. I just want to push you a little bit,
Sure,
because you
go
can
for
take
it.
all of your time, about how you would differentiate between the two concepts. Decolonising, and decentering.
I think it's really difficult to completely distinguish them. Also, depending on the kind of scholars you see as influencing those particular fields, who are both within and without of each and every one of them. I think I would say that they each take empire, colonization, and legacy as objects of study, and in that they're similar. But where they depart, I think, is their aims. I think decolonization has within it a much more subversive core, just in its field. Post-colonial literature, for me, looks more to understand particular voices, uncover them, to step into the subaltern and voice that which hasn't been voiced. I mean, this is broad focus. And decentering, again, has that element that the decolonial field has, but I think it's a lot less, in your terms, aggressive in how people perceive it. It's a safe way to approach the same subject, and I think it being safe, it actually doesn't achieve the same goal.
Thank you very much. Two things I want to say at this point. There are already 2 more people of colour in this room than I'm used to seeing at European Studies conferences, which is something that I think that we have to think about a lot in disciplinary terms. So speaking of being a little bit provocative, I'm going to put that one out there. And then the other thing is that I don't know how you'll feel about answering any questions about how you were received as a student being part of that decolonisation movement. Okay, all right, so we're open for that one.
Yeah.
That's great, thank you very much. Thank you, that was, I think, a really, really helpful start to the panel. Stefan, over to you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for becoming part of the DIMES group, because I'm very grateful to that. So I'm Stefan Keukler from the University of Leuven. I've also been teaching at the College of Europe, where also Simon is coming from, he's working. I'm coming from a completely different perspective, but I move towards, I would say, some of the DIMES perspectives. And what's my perspective? Sorry, I make some publicity too. That's the book, The Foreign Policy of the European Union, which is still a very problematic book, because it's still a very Eurocentric. Although I try to include more and more different kind of perspectives, what is different might be, for one of the reasons that you also mentioned, that is, we want that the book is still accepted by the editor, by the publisher. We now have a new publisher. Sorry, we have a new publisher, Bloomsbury, who took over from Belgrave. And my background is that I'm coming from, I think, a very mainstream traditional perspective on what European foreign policy is. But the more I interacted with my students from outside the EU at the College of Europe, or in Leuven, where 1/4 is coming from outside Europe, the more I had research projects with students and colleagues and practitioners from Africa, Asia, Russia, also America, the more and more I saw that honestly they don't know that much. And more they said, well, you're analyzing foreign policy, but you're just interested in actors, the instruments, the legal basis, etc., etc. But the foreign, in European foreign policy analysis is missing. It's about Europe. What kind of actor? Normative power actor, etc., etc. And particularly this confrontation, well, not confrontation, this dialogue with these non-European, but non-European can also be someone from Kosovo, or from St. Petersburg, or from some, and I learned it from one of your remarks, from the margins in Europe, minorities, that can be majorities in some countries too. I learned that we are not able to seriously analyze the foreign policy. Because there's also, it also implies there's a whole set of information that we need to include to be able to judge what the relevance, the impact, the legitimacy, effectiveness of foreign policy is. So more and more I became annoyed about my own lack of knowledge. And then the question was how will we tackle that? And we here I have to refer particularly to Sharon Lecoq, who is PhD research in Leuven, one of my best colleagues. She's defending her PhD in December. And is now teaching for the first time in Amsterdam, by the way. Yeah, for one course. And she has a Middle Eastern area studies background. And I saw that many political scientists were not able to understand what I wanted to say, and she could do that much better because she has been working outside Europe, and is coming from not the EU perspective or an IR perspective, but from the EU perspective. Although she's also Belgian. And then gratefully we read an article of Nora Fischer-Onaert and Calypso Duclaidis, it has been mentioned before, and then the decentralized perspective was something we took up because before I wrote the text also in the group of Sigmund de Stil, where we call it outside-in perspective, but that terminology did not catch. And then I moved to decentering, because decentering is then the opposite of, or is part of the process to try to overcome Eurocentrism, which has also been part of the discussion before. So, and this also implies that my background or my motivation, initial motivation, was very functional. That is, I found my knowledge too limited. I wanted to know more, to be able, in a more valid way, to analyze European foreign policy. So you can say that my interest was initially quite instrumental and functional. There was a remark of Sophia Price this morning, who said, well, in her time, which is also in my time when I was a student, you had much more Marxists and all kinds of variations in the analysis, which I think inspires us more than often we think. And now that partly disappears. But that's not my background, because I'm very conventional, very traditional. And so that's a background. Then we took up the scheme and the 3 stages of Nora and Calypso, and they call it provincializing, engagement, reconstruction, the 3 stages. But also when I already started giving lectures about that in Leuven or Bruges, or writing about it, we got the reaction that you already referred to. That many colleagues say provincialized, what's that? Provincialized. We don't understand that. Engagement even worse. Because then they say we don't want to engage with these terrible people of IS or all kinds of strange tribes or undemocratic regimes. We don't want to engage. Why should we engage? And thirdly, what they call reconstruction, they said we don't want to reconstruct because it's about EU foreign policy. And so we already changed the labels, and the label is already more changed than even in an article that we wrote in the book of Simon and Siglinde. We now call it critical self-reflection in 3 stages, where on one hand provincializing is part of it, or where the decolonial perspective is clear, where we're coming from, why is the EU or European scholars, do they have some motivations, objectives, policies? The second part of this critical self-reflection is to see the wide variety of how, for instance, human rights or democracy is implemented within Europe itself. So this first dimension is about Europe and critical self-reflection. The second is no more what they call engagement, which we call it learning. Learning about the other and learning from the other. And there are 2 stages, so about and from a very, and that's very difficult to write there. Many colleagues from a very value-neutral perspective, or we try to have a value-neutral perspective. This means, for instance, and we had huge discussion about that with colleagues in LSE. For instance, I'm interested in the values defended by IS, Daesh. Because I want to know, what do they see as values? Whether we like them or not, doesn't matter. But I want to know, what do they call values? And how does that inform their policies? So that stage is neutral, and secondly, also difficult, what can we learn from others? So that there are 2 stages in the intellectual process. Is there something we can learn from others? And then the 3rd stage is not what they call reconstruction, but we call it recalibration. That is, we have critical assessments about our own policies, values, political systems, etc. We bring it together with what we learned, and in that stage, the values can enter, because then you can decide, okay, we don't like that, we don't want that. But in a chapter that we published last year, we try to give the example of, for instance, the EU focus on human rights, on all variations, rule of law. What Sharon learned in her analysis of actors in the Middle East is that there is a lot of emphasis on, and now whether someone speaks Arabic here, al-adala, and I pronounce it wrongly. Al-adala, and there's another pronunciation, which is about justice, when it comes to justice or social justice. But it's not the same as what we call justice and social justice. And here I already see a problem of translation. Because nearly independent from which country in the Arab world, but also Turkey and also Iran, this justice is very important. And Polish people will say, well, also Poland is important calling itself with the name justice. But so the meaning of justice means something else, and then the exercise is, what do they really mean? What does it mean in policy? What do they mean in their value system? And then we move to recalibration, because then as a scholar, but perhaps also as a practitioner, we can say more about that later, the question can then be also in our research questions. Not to what extent do Arab countries fulfill what the EU expects from them in terms of rule of law and human rights, but in the research question, scholars can also try to automatically include dimensions that are considered as potentially relevant for these other interlocutors. Recalling obviously that there are huge differences also in the Arab world and within one country and within one society. And then the research question will not be just about rule of law and human rights, etc. But also what do you think about what is their position, but to what extent does also the EU take care of what they label as justice or social justice. Another example, much more difficult, religion values. In most of the literature on normative power in Europe, there's no reference to the religious values, with some major exceptions like Sagalov's work. But in general, we neglect it because it does not fit within our view on modernization. But perhaps we have to, particularly in the, first of all, in the provincializing or self-reflection stage, we have to see that in many countries, all parts of society, religion or spirituality is quite important. Within Europe, within European countries, but also with a lot of differences within society, but also in America, etc. So that's the first stage. Second stage can be religion is important in major parts of the world. And perhaps we don't like it, but it's there, it's seen as important, it has a structuring effect on society. And then the third part, the most difficult, is the recalibration. How do we bring that into our analysis? And here I remember very well one of my first conferences in Bruges on I think it was after the Arab Spring, and there was a diplomat from Morocco who told me, he said, well, you diplomats and scholars, well, I'm not a diplomat, you're always speaking about human rights, gender equality, etc., but you never speak about what is most important for us personally, that is our relationship to Allah. And then someone was concerned, I should be spoken about that. But he said, for us, that's the most important, but you never speak about it. And so we sign your documents, we sign your agreement that you want us to sign, but we know that we signed that, but you declare what we find important. Next question is, how do we take that into account? It's not yet solved. And then perhaps last point, and I don't know, two last points, please?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So next stage is then, and that was a question of one of the colleagues in the previous panel. I'm interested in your policy, so how can that inform our analysis? Because that's not about Europe, it's about our world, it's about Africa. And in what we try to do in the chapter in Simon and Siglinda's book is to indicate that it also can inform the traditional FPA, foreign policy analysis. And the difference can then be that where in traditional FPA you start with the question, what are actors, what are the decision-making procedures, etc. And at the end there's a question about the context in which policies have to be implemented. The first question in our approach is that you start with the context. You have to learn about the context. What is relevant in general from the context of diplomat or scholar in Morocco or in Mauritius or wherever. So you start to learn the context, and then the question is also to these people, these colleagues, these scholars in those countries, to what extent is what you find important, to what extent is you relevant for that? What is their impact? Second question is then, the actors that are defining policy in Brussels, to what extent do they have this, what we call decentrate knowledge? Do they have the knowledge or not? Many of them don't have it, others do have it, but they have a major problem, that is that in the next stage of FBA questions, what are the procedures, decision-making procedures, often they do not dare, if they know that, they do not dare to introduce it in the policy-making process. And Sharon has done field work in Lebanon and other places, and she saw very well that many diplomats know a lot about the region, are very much aware of what is important for the country's concerns, what's important not only for the elite, but also for the population, what the values are, but they simply don't dare to write it in their reports. Because if they would write about religion, they would say religion. In the EU, we don't speak about religion. And if you speak about religion, there will be a fight between the French and all the diplomats, etc. And they said, and that's what we heard from several diplomats that are based in EU delegations. They say often we do not dare to write what we know. One of the diplomats from one of the major countries said, three-quarters of what I would like to write, but I simply don't write it. Because they will have problems. And either there will be self-censorship. Either I do it or they do it, and if they do it, I will have a problem. So you said only one fault of what I write is relevant. So that's a question. That's how we can try to also include it in the traditional foreign policy analysis. Then for final question, disruptive. And we try to write it in our draft article for the special issue. And that was a controversial, difficult one, where we had a lot of also discussions. Our hypothesis, also provocative, is that by not intending to be disruptive, we might be more disruptive. Because by not using some terms like decolonial approaches, etc., we hope, we have the illusion that more people will read our text. And one of the scholar, quite important scholar in our field, he said to me, but when you use that word, I don't want to listen to you. Simply, I don't listen to you when you use that word. Voilà. And that's the reaction we get from many people. And so in this sense, we hope, we have the illusion, the pretension, that by using the decentrate perspective, and which we use not as a decision, but because we started the article of Nova, Calypso has been quite important, but we hope by using the decentrate perspective and by providing a kind of potential methodology to use it, that perhaps more mainstream people like myself, in the past at least, will think it's useful. And by perhaps more focusing on this functional dimension, indirectly also the normative dimension might enter. And that I think in one of the conferences, I don't know whether you were there, was it in Rome or somewhere else, one of the colleagues called you just for rouge for me, but you don't want to say, because otherwise someone will block you. But so we hope that by being functional, that the normative dimension might implicitly win. But I can imagine you have Carlo or
I have got many things to say, so I'm just going to put some things out there back if this is what people want to discuss. So it's interesting that you're the one who uses disruption and you use the word disturb, right, rather than disrupt. And and I wonder whether that was conscious or not. I find it amazing that anybody would ask why in foreign policy you have to know about the other. Any definition that I give to my that a student of mine will use in class has got to be talking about foreign policy as being about interactions. And I'm not entirely sure how you interact with somebody that you make no effort at all to understand. So for me, it's just kind of a non-starter. So I agree about context, but I would just say any definition of it means that you've got to have this kind of knowledge. You have taken me back to conversations that Roberta and I used to have when I was her PhD student and I was doing her seminars for the Europe in the international system. And then we used to talk a lot about IR theory and everything. And and we used to have conversations about whether, you know, especially about realism, all right? One of the things that you do in other theories is use the language of the realists and everything because that is what they understand and they're more likely to engage with you. And you know, we used to argue about whether or not that was the right thing to do. And I have to say, I was kind of always for the engagement, and now I'm like, sod them. If they don't want to listen, that really is their problem, and things are not going to move along if we're constantly going to spend time stroking the ego of some, usually a man, very often white, not always, if that is what we're more interested in than actually moving things along. But I wonder, because you talked about the practitioner world as well, whether we also need to think about whether, you know, as academics, who is our audience here, right? Is it students, is it other scholars, or is it the practitioner world? And the practitioner world might make different demands. But I'm increasingly coming to ask questions about whether or not this is good for academics or not, right? Or whether these interactions with practitioners are good, because I feel like I'm being more co-opted than vice versa, right? You know, that I have to speak in their language not to upset them. So maybe this is something that we can talk about a little bit. Same with media, by the way. And yeah, and I think we can definitely ask questions about whether a value neutral position is ever possible. And then the other thing, and I don't want to trespass too much on Tiffany, but if she doesn't say something about this, I'll bring it up afterwards, but I think that she will. But when we were online talking through the papers and everything, I can't remember who it was that was talking about how difficult it, because you talked about their concepts, their values and everything. But these people are also with us, this point that was made online, wasn't it? You know, they're here in Europe as well, so the other is here within Europe. So when we are talking about this Europe as if it is something else, it's like, isn't that just because we're forgetting about all of the people from originally from different kind of cultures and geographies, but they are here and they are among us, right, such that they are not there. So we don't even necessarily have to go too far out of our own geography if we're just kind of, so I wonder if you could just kind of think about that a little bit, and then if others want to kind of piggyback off some of those thoughts, that would be great. You're so controversial.
Yes.
Yes.
So, my name is Tiffany Williams. I am a postdoc at the Institute for Caucasus Studies in Jena, Germany. I absolutely love and adore my team. Hallelujah for that. Full disclosure, I 100% agree with what Maxine said about, I believe the term is soddom. So, yeah. I wanted to, of course, say something about my work and something about what we're trying to do with Caucasus studies. But I have in my notes here sort of the rest to answer Maxine's question about not just what definitions we give these terms, how do we treat them, are they different, are they the same, but also the reaction that she mentioned to people saying we shouldn't use decolonization. And so I don't know. she already warned you guys about me, okay, so I'm sorry, except for that. So I don't know if maybe the person you mentioned who said if you use decolonization, I don't listen to you, is the same person who wrote a letter to my university that when I was earning my PhD that said don't give her a PhD because she used decolonization so many times. We won't gossip, we don't gossip, but
afterwards.
yeah,
There's a
we don't
drinks
gossip.
reception.
But I had to giggle when you said that, not because it's funny, but because this really is, you know, it's making waves, And so what do? You know, we either ride the wave or we get left behind, is really my perspective, right? If you don't want to evolve with the rest of us, you absolutely do not have to, but you're going to get left behind. And so something that is really important, necessary, critical for me as someone who is not even from Europe, studying the Caucasus, I'm not, you know, not even from there, don't speak other languages, all of these things, right? I have to remember what it's been like to have people tell me, well, this is African American means this, Black American means this, Black people, blah, 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 women, blah, blah, blah. I have to remember how that feels and really make sure that I would never do that to anyone else. And it's not about touchy-feely, it's not about being subjective when we have our scientist hat on, absolutely not. It's about getting to the truth that is their lived experience and not mine. So I'm asking them questions about themselves, right? And I am applying it to a context. As was mentioned, I agree that you have to start with the context anyways, otherwise I'll answer the question in a way that only makes sense to me. What the heck is that? That's not good science to me. So I feel like I understand sort of, and I hate this term, just one time I'll reuse it, I feel like I understand both sides. I'm sorry. I feel like I do understand, both of those perspectives though. And because of that, I have no tolerance for someone who, is doing the whataboutism, or you're too harsh, or you should be grateful that you're here anyways, don't you think that we've made progress because you're in the same room as us? I can't imagine saying that to some of my interlocutors who are, say, from Georgia or from Moldova. I can't imagine saying something that, in my opinion, crazy to them. But this is what is said all the time within academia. And so the important kind of key as well for me, particularly given the very diverse, layered, interconnected, evolving context of the Caucasus, is territorialization. And this person, who may or may not be the same person, had a massive issue. May or may not, I don't know.
I'm going to say there's more than one of them.
Now that's true.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is
But
it personal there? No?
Yeah. No.
thankfully I can interject, so if they start clapping again, don't worry, you'll hear me. But no, the territorialization is very important because it's not just something that people fight over. It's very critical for identity. It's very critical for belonging as well. And when we break it down, I'm not a psychologist to be fair, but when we break it down to basic human needs, the human need of belonging is the most basic, according to people who know a bit more about that scientifically than my good self. And that is also following up on what Maxine said about the others are here, and what Anchor said about the others. We allow folks to come into the VU, don't we? And we give them their permits. Am I speaking from experience a little bit? We give them permits and these things, but we still remind, not we, but some people remind them, well, you're still the other, right? And this is another issue that foreign policy, it is difficult to approach this. The experience that I had when I was immigrating to France is night and day difference from the Netherlands, Austria, whatever, all the other countries. They're all very different. And the thing that I think they had in common was when people first saw me, they were like, okay. And then I would come sit down, show them my passport, they're all angry that there's another other that's coming to see them. And they see my passport, it's a US passport, and they're like, oh, you're good, stamp that, stamp, welcome, don't break any laws, get out, bring in the next person. And the next person might, based on phenotypes, look more like the individual in the immigration office, but they don't get that treatment at all. It's, oh, I'm gonna need you to pay more money to file this again because of whatever. And it's absolutely horrifying, and this to me is a foreign policy issue. I feel like it has been written about quite a bit. I feel like the scholars are writing about it in their own countries and calling this out, and it's still something that has not changed. Taking it back to the Caucasus, the treatment of the individuals who are fleeing here from Ukraine has been mixed. It sounds good in the news because we all want to sound supportive, but it has been mixed, and I would hate to see that change. I want it to be positive, obviously, right? That having been said, it was very disturbing to me the way that individuals with matching phenotypes that were fleeing were treated versus individuals who don't have matching phenotypes that a few years ago came and it was crisis. So this conversation is not over. I don't know if anyone said it was over after Syria, but it's not. Because, unfortunately, we don't want this to continue, for the love of all that's good. But this is something that I think academia has to also take a look in the mirror, so to speak, has to do some self-evaluation and think about how you champion certain people as being European, and you conflate that with a bunch of other things in a way that's very, very disturbing, very, very like a dog whistle for something that nobody dares to say out loud anymore. It's very, it's giving eugenics. Like it's really not okay. And I'm saying that as someone who studies the Caucasus with fervor and joy, and my heart breaks for what's going on, and I definitely am only happy when they're welcomed with open arms, and I'll only be happy when this mess is over. That having been said, heaven forbid something like this happens again, but let's remember how we treated the blonde white people that recently came. Another thing, in addition to territory, that I think is important, and it directly answers, I believe, Maxine's question, is language, right? And I think I just mentioned dog whistles, right? And I don't know if maybe that's just a super English American term, but the dog whistle, you know how when you blow one, the humans can't hear it, right? So it's that coded language, it's the loaded, coded language, right? That's what it means to have a dog whistle in social and political discourse. Typically, when you learn to pick up on those dog whistles, you can learn you can like exercise those discourse muscles, and you can pick up on other things as well that I see all the time, we all see all the time in academia, and we really need to stop entertaining it. We need to stop giving it space so that we can continue to evolve. Another thing, I don't know who came up with this term, is sea liony. Has anyone heard of that? I know, it's weird. I still don't really get where it came from.
I can never.
Just barking, man. I don't
Yeah,
know. A sea lion is related to the walrus.
Yeah, kind of.
I'm not from California. But the noises that they make, I guess, is where that comes
Yeah.
from. But, I don't study animals of that nature, so getting back to the humans. What that means is the whataboutism and the well actually-ism, right? When you think you're having a conversation and someone genuinely cares, you're like, well, I just want to understand, Tiffany. I don't think I'm that bad. Can you help me understand? And I'm like, oh, yes, let's talk about this. And then by the end of the conversation, I'm exhausted because they're just sea lining. They're asking question after question after question. And they're an academic. They've been an academic probably my whole life. And they act like they don't know how to go to the library. They act like they haven't read the same stuff as me. And they want my black ass, excuse my language, to educate them. Don't do that anymore. I beg of you, right? I give you that challenge to not. Learn how to recognize the dog whistles and the sea lions. If you want to ride this wave and get past this and do something about this, we cannot entertain these people anymore. There is that darker side, the folks who hear even just one or two sentences about re-territorialization, decolonization, and their immediate response is almost visceral. It's, I will destroy you. How dare you say that? And that's what your ombudsman is for. And I'm not like the strongest, most confident person, and somehow I survived it, so I really have trust and faith that anything like that happens to y'all, you can survive it as well, because they are out there. But again, we can't entertain that. We have to protect our peace and our energy as scholars, as academics. We have to do about 8 jobs and only get paid for 1. We don't have time for the sea lining, in my opinion. So I do raise that challenge to anyone who will listen, to stop entertaining that, or learn how to recognize it. And then once you learn how to recognize it, you'll be like, you know what, I ain't got time for you. And you can move on to the people who actually do want to learn, because that's a completely different thing. Now, the difference to me, and I guess I'm kind of glad that I went last a little bit because of this, the difference to me between decoloniality, decolonization, versus decentering, to say something about that. For me, decolonization is a similarly messy, massive, systemic, generational process like territorialization or and deterritorialization. It is a systemic process of systems change, if that makes any sense. It is not, it's not a buzzword, it's not a metaphor, it's not cute either, right? And it very easily can become a dog whistle. Oh, just wait, give it a couple more years and I promise you the fascists will be saying it, unfortunately. It's not, it's a process. It could take, our great-great-grandchildren might see the end of it, or they might not, right? Because it took a long time to build, and here we still are talking about it. So we can't expect to change a couple policies and boom, the systems completely rebuild themselves. Absolutely not. Decentering is a key part of decolonization. To decenter, right? To take the knowledge away from the Eurocentrism, you have to decenter. To take the knowledge away, or the focus, I should say, not take the knowledge. We leave the knowledge there, excuse me. We take the focus, excuse me, away from, please leave the knowledge, we do need it, away from the Eurocentric thinking. And this to me is where decoloniality comes in, because that speaks more to this personal responsibility to unlearn and then learn and then relearn. And let me tell you, when you do self-work and you're like, you know what, I have this personal flaw and I know I can work on it, you don't just read a couple self-help books or something and then you unlearn it like that and you're perfect, you're great, right? Like sometimes things still get triggered and you still have to work it yourself, or maybe that's just me, I don't know. But it is a process, and we need to make space for this. We absolutely have to make space for this, because it's going to take a great deal of time, which is what I'm saying. The people who absolutely refuse to do it, I'm sorry, y'all, but we gotta leave them. We gotta say, we want the best for you, but we can't have you on board anymore. Because otherwise, all it does is delay this very necessary change, right? And another thing that is important for this change is that unlearning and relearning process, because it's uncomfortable. And I think you spoke about this as well. It's extremely uncomfortable. It's wildly uncomfortable. It's visceral. It, triggers all of the triggers that anyone could possibly have. And we have to make space for that as well. We have to give ourselves permission to be uncomfortable. We have to give ourselves permission to go, ugh, that triggered me. And that's okay. I'm grown. I know enough about myself to try and unpack why, and then apply that to my work. You have to give yourself permission to do that, right? And we have to give ourselves permission to hear from others, right? Like Maxine has helped me a lot with my writing. So are you sure you want to use that term? She does it the most polite. She says that she's sassy, and thankfully she is. But she uses such a encouraging tone, and I'm like, you know what, Maxine, I don't know why I typed that. I didn't want to use that term, right? There needs to be space for that. If I was immediately triggered and was like, how dare she, then that would have cut my own growth, and that would have made my writing worse, to be honest. It wouldn't have met the high standards that we need to set in science and academia. So we have to give ourselves space and permission. And I hope it's clear that there's a difference between giving ourselves space and permission to be uncomfortable, have kind of those icky, conversations, versus the sea lining, because it's not the same thing, right? Thankfully, sea lining is such a weird word that I think it does stick into the memory. But yeah, that's really, what I kind of had in mind to share. And a final thought, just a final thought about decolonization. I was on a Zoom conference during the shortest month of the year, Black History Month. Yep. It was the EUI, and I'm saying this because it was public, so. It was hosted by EUI. It was, great scholars and all these things. They had a lot of important things to say. I raised a question at the end about, okay, so we're talking about taking things back, right? Because decolonization, you can't just put black and brown people on your syllabus and say, I decolonized my syllabus. Like, oh no, what was colonization? You gotta start giving land back at some point. Otherwise, you're not decolonizing anything, which is why decentering is just a step. We have to even devalue the system that was left behind by decolonization. We have to literally not like it anymore, okay? We have to stop being uncomfortable with certain things that make us feel uncomfortable and start getting uncomfortable with the oppression. Agree with all of that, all the things they said. I was like, preaching to the choir. And yeah, we gotta start getting that land back. I have no problem with that. I already moved, like from the US, I mean. Like, I already moved, so you can give that back to the First Nations people, please. Okay, but that having been said, I thought about it. And I thought, okay, well, even after we do that, let's say that happened. We're living in a world where that happened. I don't know know where the European Americans are going to go. I guess they won't come back here, so good luck. They got guns. But I don't know what y'all gonna do. So let's see, and this is the thing. We have to remember this. It gets messy before it gets good, right? I wish that we could recalibrate only. I think that's part of it, but no, we have to really dismantle some things if we want to decolonize, and it's scary. I'm also scared thinking about it because then I'm like, no, if they come here, I need to leave again. I left for a reason. But no, I thought about this, and I thought about the people that don't have the privilege, like I do, to just leave, right? That are also the descendants of enslaved people. We don't even know, besides West Africa, one of the largest continents, we don't even know where we would return to. There's several programs here to invite back, very, cut and dry programs here in Europe to invite back Jewish people and other people who left, like fled oppression. That's great. There's also programs in Africa for that. That's beautiful. But the sense of belonging, to loop it back to what I said earlier, we don't really know, like, which country is it now? Where did it used to be? When you take those concocted DNA tests, the whole, West Africa and South Africa, North Africa, almost everything lights up. And so that sense of belonging isn't there. And so my final point is this: if we achieve decolonization, hallelujah, I hope that we can do that. But because it's the system that created this mess in the first place did such a great job of it, and it's persisted for so long, and it was so ugly, there's still at least one, two, three, 4 groups that are still left out of belonging, that are still left behind, even if we achieve the highest level of what decolonization would mean on paper, so to speak. There's still groups that are left behind. And I'm saying that about an perspective of the Americas, but in my research I see the exact same in the Caucasus. Even if we give the land back, there are still groups that go, can I stay here or not? I don't really know anymore where. And this is something else that we have to think about, and this is something that I'm thinking about and engaging. The answer is not with me. I think it's somewhere in the future. Hopefully we can get there. But because it's so much that we have to do, we have so much work to do, we gotta get started now. So avoid the sea liners.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, we've gone over it just very, very quickly while people formulate their questions, comments. First of all, if you haven't looked, I know that Chile did not, I've just come back from Santiago, so I'm full of their constitution. If you have not looked at what they are trying to do with their constitution, really look at it. It's so interesting. And, I was just thinking of it like rights for indigenous people, for instance, centering the planet, all of these types of things. So there you have a living, breathing document. I'm seeing it on the street. It's a big document of what is really trying to be done. My mother's family is from Guyana, my father's from the UK. When I told my great aunt recently that she was African, she said, "What are you talking about? I am not African, I am Caribbean." So there's, right?
Yes.
So these things are very, very messy. I don't even know what happens with mixed race people like me.
Thank you.
Right,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Where I belong. I love it when white people say to me that I'm being racist against white people. I'm like, that half of my family is actually white, and I was raised by the white half, but okay, have at it. Intersectionality is a word we haven't mentioned much, but I think that there is some learning as well from the feminists that applies here, and vice versa. I would like to see more. The only good thing I can say about Russia's war on Ukraine is that we have largely white-on-white people and an empire, and we're essentially calling for Russia to decolonize.
Mm-hmm.
This has got the capacity, scholarship on this has now got the capacity to really transform our thinking, and to have even those who are very resistant to decolonization have to admit that
Yes.